make HC practice. So if you're an undergraduate, student of graduate study, and have questions about this, very welcome. I will turn the floor over to Arancha.
So yeah, I'll start with the customary land acknowledgement that we always do here. So we acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam. And maybe how many of you have dual degree from South Pole? And so yeah, welcome to this event. I won't say much. I just say it's a great joy, great honor to have Arancha González here with us. Arancha González took the PSIA leadership this spring, and has brought a lot of new ideas and innovation. Before that, Arancha was the foreign minister of Spain, and then before that worked in the Commission, including with Pascal Lamy, has worked on issues of trade, the question of environment and climate. So deep policymaking experience, and it's very special to have Arancha González with us today. And I want to move on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you, Juliana. Thank you very much for hosting us today. We've come all along from literally the other side of the world. When I look in what my colleague tells me it is 10 o'clock in the evening, so it's a bit the other side of the world. But we are very happy to be here, and the reason why we're here, obviously, first is to nurture the relationships that Sciences Po has with UBC and that you are approve of to the GPA of which we are extremely proud. Very international, lots of young, very talented people, that are working to become the future leaders, and that is something that we are extremely excited about. I say leaders because this is what we think you will become in whichever area of work you will decide to devote your future career, whether it would be in government, in the private sector, in NGOs, in academia, here or anywhere else. This is the imprint that we would like to have. I thought it would be interesting to talk to you about something that I've devoted a big part of my life to, but a big part of what UBC and Sciences Po have in common. How do we build bridges? How do we help governments, businesses, civil society people work to protect what belongs to everyone, and therefore what needs to be protected and nurtured by everyone for it to work? I thought we would talk about climate change today, which is the biggest global problem we have, and the biggest, I would say, the biggest existential risk to all of us, given that we only have one planet and we don't seem to be taking care of our planet properly. And I thought we would speak about climate change because, as you know, the world is meeting very soon in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, for another round of negotiations at the international level to try and find solutions that will reduce the current trajectory of increasing temperature now. And when doing that, I thought how interesting it is to see how far we've traveled since 1972. This is the anniversary of that moment, 1972, when the United Nations did its first conference. It was called a Conference on Human Environment. It was 50 years ago, and then the UN decided to create UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. This was like the beginning, 50 years ago, of our realization that we needed multilateral mechanisms to deal with sustainability. This was 1972. If I move a little bit fast forward, 1992, Rio Summit, Brazil, Another very important moment in multilateralism and international cooperation, two big legally binding climate agreements that we reached in 1992. The first one was the Climate Convention, the UNFCCC, and a convention to protect biodiversity. This was 1992. And again, this was not just talking about collaborating, it was building two legally binding agreements that would help countries take care of climate and take care of biodiversity. There was a third one that we tried to do, a convention against desertification. A big part of the earth is the desert. They didn't manage to get to an agreement. Fast forward, and when I was looking at preparing this class, I thought how history moves and how history advances. In 1997, after this 92 Earth Summit in Rio, in 97, countries created the so-called Kyoto Protocol. It was a protocol to move countries to start reducing emissions and to trade, to put together systems to trade emission reduction. And this protocol only entered into force, meaning it only became legally binding in 2005. And guess what? It became legally binding when Russia ratified this protocol. I was looking at my notes to prepare for this conference, and I remember, because I was there when we did this, that there was a deal with Russia to help Russia become a member of the World Trade Organization. Russia wanted to do that. And in exchange for this, Russia would ratify the Kyoto Protocol. And Russia's ratification was necessary because for the protocol to enter into force, a number of signatories needed to ratify the agreement, and they needed to represent a number of countries, but also volume of emissions. So with that step forward, Russia enormously helped this protocol enter into force and become the law for reducing emissions in the world. How interesting sometimes history is. Fast forward, 2015, the Paris Agreement. Paris is where we are located, where we live. This was a very important moment. And it was important because all of this work that had happened since 1972 came into one treaty, legally binding, with measures to reduce emissions, so on mitigation and adaptation and commitments on financing. And with very clear targets, limiting the increase in the temperature, in the trajectory of temperature increase to, if possible, less than 1.5 degrees centigrade compared to pre-industrial level. The target was 2, but there were a group of countries that pushed really hard to try and be a little bit more ambitious, because they knew, in particular small island developing states, that a 2% would already be too much for them to have a place to live, to have a country to go home. So, agreement to reduce the increase in temperature, trying very hard to do an increase that would keep the temperature below 1.5 increase. 50% reduction of emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. This was the essence of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2016. And I was thinking about this long road that we've been walking together to realize how difficult all of this is today. How much multilateral cooperation in the space of climate change is at risk today. And the risk comes essentially because leadership in the world today is much more nationalistic, it's much more transactional, and it's much more short-term focused. And if you are to invest in climate change, you need to have a bit of a longer term view. You need to care about global commons, so it cannot just be purely transactional, because transactional basically speaks of a zero-sum world. And dealing with climate change cannot be seen as a zero-sum game, otherwise you wouldn't do anything about it. And it requires a leadership that has an ability to care about its own people, like understanding that caring about your own people today does not work unless you care about people everywhere else in the world. So we are facing a big difficulty in international cooperation. I know that the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh would be difficult. It will be difficult because some of the members in this summit are at war, and it's a war that is the result of the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. It's a war that is having a big impact on the prices of fuel, of food, and fertilizers, putting a lot of countries, especially in the south, in a very difficult situation from a national debt point of view, and they feel that the rest of the world is not really taking seriously what is happening to them. It will be difficult also because there is a big geopolitical conflict, geopolitical rivalry between the US and China, the epicenter of which is technology and technological power in the future. And obviously, it makes more difficult to work around issues that would be important for both the US and China to resolve, since both are suffering the huge impact of climate change, and since the two, being big emitters, need to act if they want climate change to not get out of control. So, add to this the weaponization of energy between Russia and the European Union, and you have a very difficult cocktail for this multilateral cooperation to work in the space of climate change. Now, what can be done? Something can be done. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about this, right? If it was all lost, we would just go home and start crying. But we are in a university, and we think that there are things that can be done. So let me give you a few ideas of things that could be done. The first thing that could be done is work to protect what we have achieved so far on climate change at the multilateral level. Work to make sure that we do not destroy this asset that we have represented by the Paris Climate Accord. But work also to build ambition on this Paris Agreement. Now, maybe the ambition cannot be built at the multilateral level. Maybe not all countries can be brought to the table, but why not build in coalitions of the willing, in climate clubs, in groups of countries that can show the way in some sort of enlightened self-interest to bring more ambition to the climate agreement. I think it's very important to do this not just in the mitigation agenda, but also on the adaptation. If you look at the incredible impact that climate change is having in many parts of the world, including, for example, last floods in Pakistan, a big part of the answer is investing more in adaptation. So building clubs that can work to bring more ambition on certain topics like adaptation would be important. Another area where more club-like ambition could be brought is in the area of loss and damage. The countries that are at the forefront of the impact of climate change are saying, how will we finance going back to where we were before? How will we finance the recovery of our island that was devastated by the last hurricane? How will we be able to reconstruct our infrastructure that has been wiped out by the last flood? So loss and damage is another area where maybe there is a way to build a bit of ambition through coalitions. Germany has been trying to do that, proposing some sort of global shield that would be wanting to mobilize a pool of insurance funds that can come in to support the countries that have suffered from a major climate impact. So let's preserve what we have, and let's try to build ambition with coalitions of the world. Second, yes, a lot of the big guys are finding it difficult to collaborate and to cooperate. But there are many countries in the middle. And they today have not only the ability, but also the responsibility to maybe be more some sort of guardians of the value of international cooperation in climate change. So the second, where I see an avenue for progress is in the mobilization of countries that are smaller in size or medium size that realize that they cannot bring geopolitics into climate change because for them it's survival. And they can they must today be much more activistic. We had in the Paris School of International Affairs, we started the academic year this year with an amazing leader, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. Barbados is a confetti country, it's 200,000 inhabitants. So by size, you would think that it has very little power. But the voice of the Prime Minister is extremely powerful in galvanizing others behind her to be engines for more ambition on climate change. The third maybe is to reframe the narrative around climate change. Because in some countries, climate change is seen as leading to having to make very difficult compromises that cannot be made, right? Okay, if I invest in climate adaptation, then I need to take money away from education, and I need to take money away from healthcare, or I need to make compromises that are difficult to make. I was reminded yesterday that even talking about net zero is not a very appealing proposition for many around the world. So what if we followed what an Indian member of parliament recently called a net zero is a future positive. So why don't we frame this in terms, why don't we build a narrative that speaks of the opportunities that exist behind the transformation that will be required to reduce emissions. So why don't we present it, frame the political framing in a more positive way that would be more appealing. Maybe this is a bit what the US has tried to do in the last climate bill. It's linked climate bill with an industrial policy. So we will do a reduction of emissions, but there's going to be an opportunity to build industries in America. So maybe trying to do this in a positive way can help us in moving countries to do what they need to do, which is reduce emissions. The fourth area where I think there is a space to work is in reviewing financial instruments. Finance is available. There is finance. There is money parked in the World Bank, in regional development banks, in the IMF. There is finance that is parked in capital markets. Why don't we develop new instruments to use this finance? Let me give you an interesting example that the head of the UN Development Program shared with us during our visit to New York at the beginning of the week. Uruguay has just issued a set of climate bonds. The performance of these bonds is dependent on the performance of the country towards climate change. So there is an incentive for the government to move in that it will reduce the cost of getting capital if they are good in reducing emissions. And the guardian of how the country is going to do this will be the UN Development Program. So a neutral third party that would be the guarantor that this mechanism can work. The fifth area where possibilities exist is in mobilizing more the private sector. And mobilizing them around specific sectors that are more emission, those that are responsible for the biggest chunk of emissions. So the steel industry, the transport industry, the energy generation industry, but maybe also building coalitions of businesses that will bring the solutions, like the green hydrogen coalition. So a bigger part, a bigger piece of private sector in this multilateral cooperation. I only have two more to offer, but I wanted to show you that there are plenty of areas where work can happen, even at times of geopolitical turmoil. The sixth suggestion is to better align UN agencies working on climate change. UN Environmental Programme, UN FCCC, UN Development Programme. What if they were to use their resources in a more coordinated manner? What if they were to put all these resources getting more bang for the buck instead of doing this in a piecemeal manner? There is a space for also international organizations, especially around the UN, to be more agile and to be recast, to reshape towards this objective of supporting climate change. The seventh one, and it's my final suggestion, is we have to align better trade policies and climate policies. And we need to do that because the last thing we need in this very charged geopolitical context is to start a trade war on grounds of fighting climate change. So building better synergies between the trade community and the environmental community will be extremely important. And as the WTO, the World Trade Organization, has shown with the agreement they reached on fish subsidies last July, it can be done. So I wanted, in a nutshell, to tell you that there is hope, but that we have to be extremely forceful at pushing for concrete outcomes to happen. The new multilateralism will be less about state-centric responses, as the classic multilateral system was. It will be more what Pascal Lamy, who was head of the World Trade Organization, calls polylateralism. So it's going to be more about bringing together different actors that can contribute to this, bringing solutions to this fight of our generation if we want to guarantee the life of future generations. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with you these very few ideas. Obviously, the floor is now to you. And after we finish discussing climate change, we're going to be discussing maybe all you wanted to know about the Paris School of International Affairs, and you never dared ask. Over to you. Thank you for breaking the ice.
You mentioned mobilizing the public sector, the private sector, as a tool we can use to combat climate change. And I was just wondering,
activities. And more companies are asking themselves these questions. I sit on an advisory board of a company in France that is in the food and beverages sector, and they are committed to report on a set of indicators, and they want to make sure that they are doing this in the right way. So they are genuine about this. They want to reduce the use of plastic in their packaging, and if possible, phasing it out. They want to reduce the amount of sugar they put in their beverages and their products. They want to reduce the amount of water that they use, and they have, and they are reporting on this, and they've got mechanisms for peer review that what they are doing is fair. So there is a pressure that is coming both from shareholders, from regulators, but also from the wider public, because we too, as consumers that we are more and more empowered to make the right choices. That is pushing companies to be also ahead of the curve in contributing to this fight. So maybe some of them are not doing it because they genuinely believe in it. Fair enough, but they have to do it because there is a push from the market to do that. Although I would tell you from my experience that many of them, the vast majority, are genuine about it because they also suffer the impact of climate change in their businesses. Sure.
I have a question about climate migration and climate refugees, and I was just curious, if you could provide any insight into any international corporations that has happened with developing effective and humane climate policy, especially for those countries that are living.
Yeah, this is a new field, climate migration. We don't even have a standard definition for climate migration, but it's happening, right? People are moving because life in parts of the world are just becoming, inhabitable. And there is no way to conduct an economic activity or life, and therefore they are pushed to move. We are now starting to see, and it's interesting that you mentioned this. We were this morning in a dialogue with members of the faculty here in UBC. This is an area where, in my view, we have to break a bit of ground in definitions, but also in commitments. Because we cannot just simply say, just like we have refugees, and we recognize that they are refugees when there is a war, when there is a conflict, when there is a persecution, political, ethnic, religious, etc., we need to be much clearer about the fact that we will have climate refugees, people that will be forced to move. And there is the beginning of this conversation in the international scene, in my view. This is an area where we will have to be much clearer about roles, responsibilities, laws, international protection, and through that also international responsibility. But thank you for mentioning this. This is, if I were a student, this is an area where I would invest a bit of time. It's a new area and it will be extremely prominent in the future.
I'm running the Zoom meeting for this, and we've got a question from the Zoom chat. So I'm just going to read this out. This is from Chiwan Sasha Lee. So I'm reading this out verbatim. Where there has been a continuous struggle in trying to legalize international treaties or agreements among the nation states, how can we enforce or strongly persuade countries, both developed and emerging, to adopt better climate policies and greener behavior?
Say that again, because I missed the beginning of the
Sure.
question.
I'm also going to just take my mask off, sorry, so that this can circulate. Okay, so when there has been a continuous struggle in trying to legalize international treaties or agreements among nation states, how can we enforce or strongly persuade countries, both developed and emerging, to adopt better climate policies and greener behavior?
Yeah, I think this, thank you for this question. And thanks also to those that are following us via Zoom. I think this question goes back to how do we foster good behavior? And part of it has to do with what kind of narrative will we use to foster this good behavior. in some parts of the world, saying that you have to do this because someone else asked you to do it is not very compelling. But to say that you will do this because otherwise, hell would break loose, excuse my language, in some parts of the world, this is not very compelling. But if you say, well, do it because there is a huge economic opportunity in this transformation that is an inevitable transformation. It will be inevitable that you have to go through this transformation. Climate change is already hitting you, so you might as well try to find a silver lining in this transformation. You may also be able to find a space to your own space, a space in the new economy that will be developed to respond to climate change. So I think the way we frame the narrative around climate change will help us in maybe getting more traction domestically for the huge transformations that will be required, because let's face it, for this to work, it requires huge economic and social transformations. So let's use a narrative that helps politicians who, at the end of the day, in order to do this, need to go through their parliaments and through their the court of their public opinions, and let's make sure that the public opinions also continue to push for this outcome.
I just wanted to ask a question based on a point that you just made. You said that, this whole fight requires a social and economic transformation. And something that came to my mind as a concern is that for more economically proficient or more developed countries, like this social and economic transformation is easier essentially, versus those countries who aren't so up there yet because of our global order, how it's shaped. How would you say that this transformation is done on equal grounds for all countries?
Yeah, and this speaks, and thank you very much for this question, because this is a fundamental question, and it's one of fairness. How do we do this? The transformation is already happening, right? And actually, many of those most affected by climate change are precisely in countries or in regions of countries that are less prepared and have less capacity to adapt. So your question speaks to the fairness dimension of the climate transition. How do we make sure that those that have traditionally contributed more to the accumulation of emissions contribute more to the solution? How do we ensure that those that today are emitting more contribute more to the solution? And how do we ensure that the financial system is fit for purpose to help those that will not be able to finance the transformation themselves, but would have to have recourse to financial means? So repurposing the financial system to help those countries would be essential. This is part of a conversation that is ongoing, and I have to say that it's a conversation that is not moving as fast as it should, and it's very short-sighted from my point of view, because if this part would be moving faster, there would be a larger coalition of countries that would be saying and putting pressure on those that have to reduce more and faster, which is what we need, what we now understand we need to do, more and faster.
Can I just ask a follow-up?
Of course.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And something that also comes to my mind after what you said is, would that financing create more of an economic dependency and further this divide that we see between the global north and the global south? Because we say that the bigger emitters are responsible for more of that transformation, and the more responsible actors are usually the ones that hold more power. So would that even maintain and further this income gap and this power imbalance within this global order that we're seeing today? Or do you think that that's not the outcome that we would see?
It doesn't have to be like this. It does not have to be like this. Investing in helping Pakistan adapt its agricultural system, adapt its infrastructure to a more flood-resistant infrastructure, does not need to have as an outcome. On the contrary, you would help. I've taken Pakistan as an example. I could take any other in the world, but investing in adaptation does not mean preserving a dependency or creating a new dependency. It's just simply empowering a country to be more resilient, to address a major risk that the country today has to de-risk and for which it has no financing. So we have to imagine this in terms of you as an individual, you subscribe a risk, you subscribe an insurance policy, right? And you decide what risks you face. If you drive, you need an insurance for your car. If you have a bike, for your bike. If you have a dog, you have an insurance just in case the dog bites somebody. Well, now to all of this, if you're a country, to all of these risks, you have a major climate risk. And helping the countries manage this climate risk would make countries more resilient. If you make countries more resilient, in reality, you're investing today to avoid having to invest for the rest of your life in curing the consequences of not getting those countries up to speed. Now, the other part of the equation, let's not look at adaptation, let's look at technological development. There is a whole new sector of the economy that is available for countries that have sun, water, minerals, skilled labor. So you decide how you are going to, and you can decide how you will play in this new economy, but you cannot do that unless you have a minimum means to tap into those new opportunities that exist. So hence, repurposing the financial sector to support this transition to all countries, and in particular those that are less prepared to do that, would be essential. So there was this lady, and then we go.
More of a, or less of a theoretical question, but I'm wondering how optimistic you feel about the upcoming COP27 conference on a scale of like 1 to 27.
So, when I was very young and started working in the European Commission, there was this president of the European Commission, Jacques Delors. He was an amazing Europeanist, and he taught me since I was very little. In life, you are not optimistic or pessimistic. You are activistic. So my advice to you is, on a scale from 0 to 10, how activistic do you want to be? Optimism and pessimism, that just doesn't help. It just doesn't help. Activism is what we need. So I never answer that question.
Thank you so much for addressing the technological sort of like side to the transition. But when we go through the green energy transition, it's obvious that there's a really like high stakes competition that's happening, especially amongst this country.
Yes.
But how do we ensure that we kind of divvy up the resources that we have among countries that don't particularly have the resources already to take advantage of them? And I think in particular, I want to cite an excellent New York Times article about deep sea mining and how countries that were initially given a stake in deep sea mining had to forfeit these things, or forfeit their shares to a private Australian company, because the UN agency put in charge of ensuring the fair division of resources were not really doing their job. Basically, how do we ensure that the international organizations have the right incentives to kind of make sure that there is fair play going on, even for countries that don't have the bureaucratic capacity? For example, Haiti obviously does not.
So I would say that we've got like 4 places in this world that have special status. They belong to everyone and to no one. Arctic, Antarctic, it is a space. The UN has in a variety of manners, some more developed than others, law of the seas, more on the seaside, very little on Antarctica. If you're interested by the issues of access to resources, looking at Antarctica is fascinating, because these are spaces where nobody thought that we would ever need them. So nobody paid a lot of attention to the governance. And now we are starting to realize, also with climate change, that they are becoming a much more important part to protect. So we have first a question of how do we protect the spaces that are vital also, and that are part of our commons. And there, my sense is that where the UN is strong, let's try to preserve that. Where the UN is not very present, let's try to expand that presence. Although in saying that, I know it's difficult, because right now the interest of countries vary a lot. But then there is another dimension of this conversation. Of course, technology will be powered on a number of minerals, a number of raw materials. And those raw materials are scattered in different places around the world. And there's going to be a tension in the future between open markets and security considerations. And my sense is that we will have to find a balance between open markets and security considerations. Now, it's no surprise that some countries would want to weaponize access to those minerals, that some countries would want to keep the minerals for themselves, because it would be a huge asset. If you think of lithium, or if you think of rare earths, if you think of those minerals that will be essential for the transition, for the energy transition, which is a huge part of the climate transition, of course, many countries would be tempted to keep it for themselves. But there is also others that would want to keep their markets open, but get a better return for the minerals they have. In the past, maybe there would be less interest in helping them benefit, extract more value add from those minerals, get more downstream transformation in the country. But right now they have more power because they are sitting on a rare resource. So we will need to find a balance between open markets and security consideration, and it will not be easy to do, because now the temptation would be to weaponize access to these raw materials. So there is the gentleman over there, and then the gentleman. You tell me when.
Yeah, and then one more here, and I guess you'll reach 3 o'clock very soon, so.
We need to give a bit of, okay, so let's try to do this quickly. You put your questions and I'll try to do a responses to all of them.
Perfect, thank you. So when you speak about this fight, like I guess climate change, we sort of assume that there should be an alignment when it comes to how we perceive climate change across all these countries and these leaders and all of these people that are responsible for the fight. But we also witnessed for the last 10 years that has been an extreme rise in, whether through elections or through like public opinions across different countries in the north and the south, that there's a rise in parties and a strong anti-climate sentiment that backtracks us against all this work that we can do in like fighting climate change. So how does this rise of very anti-climate leaders, either elected or not elected, actually fit into this hopeful equation that we want to achieve?
Thank you. Let me just take all the questions like this way.
Sure. Mine's a specific question. You brought up the points that nations should think less nationally and more globally, and also that trade policy shouldn't be hijacking the climate policy. So I was thinking, what are your thoughts on the role of carbon tariffs? Because they aim to use soft power to incentivize other countries, but also protect the domestic economy.
Thank you.
I have a very related question to the first one. Do you have any insight into how we can secure cooperation with leaders who are not pretty much anti-Western, right? How do you talk to them? Where do you begin to build cooperation in that case?
Yeah, I normally don't like this dialogue about West, and I never use the West, like I never use the global South, because I think they don't mean anything. I mean, when I talk to a lot of my Latin American colleagues, they think very closely to to me, but they are not in the West. They are in the deep South. So terminology matters. So for anti-climate populist, let's also be careful about how we talk about climate change. Sometimes the way we've talked about climate change is you guys have to stop doing what you've been doing up until now, and by the way, go and find yourselves another job. So we will have to be very careful with managing the transition and not giving a lot of people that are in the coal mines, that are in the, let's say, in the dirtier part of the economy, dirty in the sense of more emitting part of the economy, the sense that they have no future. So how we manage the transition matters. How we frame a narrative around climate change matters. All I can tell you is that I witnessed very attentively, or I looked at very attentively what happened in the last elections to the European Parliament in Europe. Elections to the European Parliament in Europe have been on a downward trend for 20 years. And the last election, we saw an enormous increase in participation. And the participation came from young people who had been totally absent from this discussion. And it came because a central part of the debate in the campaign had been green climate change. So I'm giving you the counterfactual to tell you that it is possible to frame the conversation in a different way. And especially that we cannot think that these transitions are painless. They are painful, so we have to take a bit of care of the pain. On carbon tariffs, this is a bit of a project that the European Union has to make sure that the efforts at decarbonizing in the European Union do not get diminished by importing CO2 from outside. That's the logic. Now, if we had a carbon price, the discussion would be unnecessary. We do not have a carbon price, and we will not have one anytime soon. So what's the second best? I says the second best would be to try and see what's the equivalence in efforts between countries on their climate policies. So I hope that the EU's proposal for a carbon tariff would lead to a discussion with countries about equivalence in climate efforts, because that would be a second best to a carbon price without the need to put a compensatory mechanism at the border, which is what these carbon tariffs are about. And my preference would be for this discussion about equivalence to take place at the multilateral level, so that everyone gets a chance to build a different system. If they don't, then we would know that there is no alternative, but we always have to look at the alternative first. Sorry that I know that there are many questions that you wanted to ask, but I want to give Mark and Celine a chance to share with you a few comments about CO2. Thank you.
So we thought we could just take the opportunity to very briefly tell you a little bit about the Paris School of International Affairs. For those who don't know, it's one of 7 graduate schools at Sciences Po, really focusing on international affairs, and we have 7 master's programs that we offer. We can't possibly tell you enough about the school in the 5 minutes or so that we've got here, but the timing is very good because 2 weeks tomorrow, on Saturday the 19th of November, we're having our online open house for graduate programs for all of Sciences Po master's programs. So if any of you are interested potentially in going on to do master's degree study in Paris at Sciences Po, including at the School of International Affairs, 2 weeks tomorrow, there's an all-day fair where you can basically go and have sessions with each of the different schools, specific master's program, to learn more about this. Of course, you're also very able to go and look on the website and find out more about programs. So let me just highlight a few things now, and I'll let Celine tell you a little bit more. Just three points. First is diversity. We're probably the most diverse School of International Affairs in the world. We have about 1,500 students And within those 1,500 students, we have students who come from 110 different nationalities. So the world comes to PSIA, the world is PSIA, and that creates an amazing discussion and dialogue exchange between students, because you're sharing these perspectives in all your classes with students from across the world. Our faculty too, we have a diversity of faculty. Yes, we have quite a number which are European based, but we do bring in faculty from other parts of the world, including, since COVID, we take advantage of the fact that we can actually teach very effectively through Zoom, and this allows us to have faculty who are based in Brazil doing work on environment in the Amazon, or doing work in other parts of the world relevant to what they're teaching. And we think this is a strength that we can add to make our faculty even more diverse. So diversity is the first thing I wanted to point out. Second is excellence. Sciences Po has been ranked in the top 3 for politics and international studies for the last 4 years by the QS rankings. International affairs, that's our school. So we feel that that's a pretty good reflection of our contribution to Sciences Po more broadly, in terms of at least teaching the aspect of international affairs. So we tell you that we think that we have a great program, but it is also to externally validate in that way. At least, of course, there are many rankings out there, but we like that one for obvious reasons. Top 3 in the world is something that we're very proud of. And the third point is flexibility. When you come to SIA, you don't study a generic degree called International Affairs. You choose between one of 7 programs. Celine is responsible for 2 of them, in environmental policy and energy transition, 2 separate programs there. But we also have programs in international security, international development, international governance and diplomacy. What are the other ones? International economic policy,
human rights
and human rights and interests. I do, of course, know all of them, but just from there. And the point is that you pick one of these 7 master's programs, and then you complement it. We have a selection of sort of what we call concentrations, but they're effectively minors. And there are 5 regional and 13 thematic concentrations. And you combine with your major up to 2 minors. So you basically are there, and you get a chance to study both the depth within a particular master's, but also do these cross-cutting thematic on a regional basis or on a thematic basis to complement to it. So again, you get this chance to build your own program, combining major with minors. And on top of that, your 3rd semester in a 2-year program allows you to go outside the institution to do an internship. So you get a chance to do up to 3 months of working in an organization, international organization, government organization, non-governmental organization, or a corporate, and you can get practical experience that you've taken from your classroom, and you go back for your 4th semester and do more of that, or you can do a master's thesis as part of that. So those are the 3 words I wanted to tell you: diversity, excellence, and flexibility. But maybe Celine wants to complement that, either in terms of the masters that she's responsible for, or more generally, and of course we can try to answer a few questions. But the graduate open day is 2 weeks tomorrow, and that's a great time to really drill deeper into these different programs. Celine.
Yes. Hi everyone. So I'm, as Mark just said, academic advisor for 2 of our 7 master programs. Academic advisor, it means I curate the program together with the scientific advisor. We choose the courses, we choose the focus, we choose the teachers, and I support students with any questions they may have, how to select courses, how to find an internship. I don't do all of this on my own. We have career support services, we have student support services. But what I'm saying also is that one of our, let's say, special feature at CI is that we are really student focused, and you have, an everyday interlocutor, an everyday academic team. And if you came to choose to study with us environment or energy related topics, that could be me. I think Arancha has said a lot about why those topics are so important today, and why governing those transitions, the ecological transitions, the environmental transitions, the energy transition, brings about questions, issues, challenges, dilemmas, trade-offs, and we need a new generation of leaders, of practitioners, of policymakers, of analysts, of negotiators, of mediators to help us do this. So that's what we propose to train you for, if you come with those 2 masters. As we said, you will not only be among environmental and energy specialists, because you will be part of this broad, diverse community of students studying different features and aspects of international affairs. You will both meet them in those concentration courses that Mark mentioned,
which means that you could supplement your environment and energy specialization by learning about African studies, Middle Eastern studies, but also have a governance or diplomacy type of specialization. You can learn about research methods if you want to do a master's thesis. So there's, as Mark said, 18 different specializations, concentrations. I won't go through all of them, but that allows you to really curate your own degree and structure your master in the way that's most relevant to what you want and need to learn and what your professional and academic goals are. So we have also a great events person who brings together all our students on a weekly basis. We receive international leaders, we receive policy analysts, we receive just global figures in all the different fields that we look at, and that makes for a very rich student experience. So this is very brief, but I can answer a few questions now. We can answer a few questions now, but also as Mark said, November 19th, we will be in the office all day, although it's a Saturday, to present at different time of the day the different master programs. So in spite of the quite large time difference between Vancouver and Paris, there should be a session that's accessible to you at a reasonable hour of the day. And there we will present not only the program structure in more details, but also application processes, admission, and we can answer a whole range of more specialized questions. But for now, if you have a few broad questions that you would like to ask directly, please feel free and take advantage of our presence here. Anyone? Anyone interested in applying perhaps for a PSIA master degree?
For those who are on the dual BA, the UBC Sciences Po dual degree, you can automatically progress on to a master's program at Sciences Po, either PSIA or another school. That's all Sciences Po undergraduate students have that ability. So those on the dual BA continue to have that opportunity as well. But that's it. You should still obviously learn about the program. It's as carefully as possible because we ask for a letter of motivation as part of it, so we need to understand why have you chosen the course and what is it particularly about the program that you choose that fits with your interest and your experience so far.
Perhaps you'll be interested to know in terms of what students do after PSIA. It's about a third go towards public sector jobs in their countries, so they become policymakers in the area of studies and they bring change at that level. But a third go into the private sector and in the field environment and energy. A lot of them become sustainability officer or sustainability consultant for either business structures or different types of organizations. And then I'd say about the third go towards international organization or NGO work. So there's also a broad range of sort of possible outcome and career prospects that come with our master program. Yes.
Are the classes taught in English or French?
Yeah, it's an English language school. There's a possibility to take a few courses in French. We offer those, but it's not an obligation or a criteria to speak French. In fact, we are the only school at Sciences Po which has as an entry criteria English language. So you need to master English, but you don't need to master French. But it's a good opportunity to learn or to progress in French if you're interested in doing that. Because you're in Paris, and we do offer like French classes for foreign as a foreign language. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little biased here and I love UBC too much, but how does PSIA go about actively, supporting students' well-being, whether it's like well-being or like very career-oriented? Like, are you very active with supporting your students? And if so, what avenues do you offer for people that would go in there? And yeah.
I think there's two levels. There's PSIA and there's Sciences Po level. So at Sciences Po, we have really good student services in terms of health, mental health support, and those have been reinforced in the last few years. And let's face it, the pandemic has also brought new awareness to student needs in terms of specifically mental health support and campus-based services. So you would have access, of course, to all of Sciences Po services, which are in French and English for the majority of them. And then at the level of PSIA, as I said, you have this very close relationship with your academic team.
So that's me, in the case of those two masters, that's me and an academic assistant, Maloney. And we are basically on call to answer to your needs, your questions, your emails on a daily basis. And I spend a lot of my time meeting with students, doing student consultation, helping students organize events, organize projects, trying to answer to their needs, both individual and collective. And then we have, again, at the Sciences Po level, a career service, but also our own CIA career support services, where you receive a weekly newsletter that's listing all the relevant jobs and internship offers, where you can get support, like designing your CV, where you get training in interview techniques. And we have a new mentoring program where, either second year or students or alumni come and help our current students both to adapt to life at CIA, but also in terms of transitioning to job market and finding internships. And we've done a lot of work on this in the last year or two, and since Arancha's arrival with us, to really reinforce student-to-student peer support and our broader student services.
That's the point I just stood up because I wanted to add, is that we also are responsive to individual student needs, but we're also very proactive in terms of thinking, how can we continue to improve the student experience, do more for the students in that way? And we have different feedback mechanisms for that as well. We have, at the course level, there's a designated student in each course who's there to liaise with the faculty member, but also to do feedback to us in case anything's not working well. At the master's level, there's a representative of students for each of the master's program, and we meet with the dean and us on a semesterly basis, but also to, if need be, beforehand. And there's also a students association for CIA students, which again is there. So between these different feedback mechanisms, we feel we have a pretty good pulse as to what's going on. And as we're designing and developing our offer, we're always thinking in terms of the student experience, and importantly, student well-being, and what you're looking for to go beyond the classroom to the transition into the world of work, which is where 95% of CIA students go on into the world of work when they finish.
I just had a quick question about the dual degrees. Are they, like, you go through them in Sciences Po and the other institution as well, like similar to the undergrad thing, or like are there different mechanisms?
So thank you, because that was one of the things I meant to mention in the beginning, that you essentially can study UPSIA in two ways. Is that the standard is a 2-year degree program where you do 2 years UPSIA. The other option is through the dual degree program. We have 10 international dual degrees and we have 4 national dual degrees. And almost all of them are designed the same way. You do your first year at CIA and your second year at the partner university. There are a few exceptions, and in fact, you can't apply for the exceptions until you've come into CIA and you do it during your first year for that. So the default is that you would apply at CIA to combine a year with us with a year with one of the partners. And in the second year, you would then progress on to that second university. And at the end of the 2 years, you come away with the degree from both schools. Does that answer?
So like, you first, and then from your first year apply.
Absolutely.
There's only actually one exception for French speakers in that case, which is one of the other master degree I'm responsible for. It's a dual degree in environmental science and policy. And this is with 2 French institutions, so Sciences Po and Sorbonne University. And this is for people who have a background in art sciences. I don't know if it's the case with one here, but basically you get further training in environmental, climate, water science there, and you get policy analysis, social science training at Sciences Po. And this is shared. You do courses in those institutions throughout the year. But all the other degrees would be 1 year at TIA and then 1 year in the partner institution. I think there was another hand.
Yeah, I was wondering, because you mentioned like that there was some support for like finding internships and things like that. What specifically kind of structures does Sciences Po put in place compared to like the core programs like Chance or what kind of thing could you
Yeah.
I mean, so we don't find internships for our students. We help them and empower them and train them and equip them to find their own internships.
So I think, it goes from those consultations you have with your academic advisor to try to define your area of interest, the kind of position, but also of organization and of sector you're interested in. And this goes, way beyond the internship moment. It goes back to your course selection. So, what's your project after SIA? Which kind of courses should you choose so that you develop the knowledge, the expertise, the skills, the tools, etc., to build up your profile and tend towards that goal. And then, as I said, you have the both Sciences Po Careers Report and the PIAT Careers Report, where you will get access to the practical workshop on CV design, interview techniques, etc. That's more the Sciences Po level. And at PIA, we get approached a lot by organizations that are looking out for our students. And that's why I can say with a lot of confidence that it's, our students do not really struggle to find the internships that they want to find or the experience that they want to find. Organizations really value our students and graduates, and they very often come back to us in order to advertise their jobs or internship opportunities. And even here, I'm on this work trip and I keep forwarding internship ads that I receive from different organizations. So as I said, it's more about helping you to identify what's of interest to you and then equipping you so that you have the right sort of application package and material to go on and apply. And it's usually a smooth process.
Fortunately, we're gonna need to go because we've got a meeting with the Vice Provost International in 1 minute.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
There's a helicopter behind me. But please join me in thanking